Welcome to Lunch and Learn, a monthly session hosted over lunch, where we get to hear from sustainability subject matter experts. I'm Wyman, Assistant Editor at EcoBusiness, Asia Pacific's largest and leading ESG media and intelligence organization, and I'm pleased to be moderating today's session. For those who have been tuning into this series, we took a break last month to convene our annual flagship forum, Unlocking Capital for Sustainability, which looked at the role of sustainable finance in the disrupted world. As we restart the sessions, this month we're going to dive into a very related topic, looking at the state of Asia's waste problem and whether directing capital and finance towards supporting circular innovations and infrastructure upgrades is going to alleviate and ultimately help resolve the crisis. Of course, I think different governments, organizations, and even individuals are looking at the problem from different angles. And in this session, I'm also very curious to know, what do you think has the greatest potential to tip the scale towards solving Asia's waste problem, specifically the plastic scourge? And right now, I think a key development on this front is that representatives of 175 nations have pledged to work on a legally binding global treaty that would not only aim to clean up the world's plastic waste, but would likely encompass curbs on plastics production itself. Supporters have said that the agreement would be the most important environmental accord since the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, in which nations agreed to cut greenhouse gas emissions. It really could be a once-in-a-generation opportunity. In Asia, developing countries are plagued by a lack of proper infrastructure and access to financial resources and struggle with the low rate of waste separation. In more advanced cities such as South Korea and Singapore, there is still pushback or challenges in getting buy-in for schemes such as beverage container return schemes. Just last month, EcoBusiness also published a story on Nestle chief Mark Schneider, making a point that extended producer responsibility laws already hold companies accountable for their plastic waste, add a financial burden, and that not everything related to collecting and recycling waste should be thrown in the laps of corporates. The comment sure ruffled some feathers, but I think it is food for thought. Where should the responsibility lie, and how do we build a complete ecosystem for the better management of waste? Let me introduce our experts today, who hopefully will help us answer this question too in their presentations as well. Umesh Madhavan, Research Director at nonprofit organization, the Circulate Initiative, who will give us an overview of the state of plastic waste management in Asia, specifically Southeast Asia, and share what it would take to close the financing gap for effective solutions. As well as Ng Pei Kang, founder and CEO of Tria, a Singapore-based firm that is actively working alongside companies who are keen to close the loop by redesigning packaging, especially food packaging. Both speakers will each be given about 10 minutes to address us. After their presentation, we will have a 25 minutes interactive Q&A. So do put your questions in the chat box below as we go along. Umesh, over to you, please.
Thanks, Raimund. Just give me a second as I load up my slides.
Sure, no worries. Go ahead. Yes, I think we see it now.
All right, great. Let me just begin. So first of all, hello everyone, and thank you, Raimund, for the introduction. It is a pleasure for me to be here to share my views on the plastic pollution challenge and the solutions available to tackle it. It is a tricky one, but it's a very important one, and one that should actually be on the agenda of everyone, given the importance of that issue for not just the current generation, but for generations to come. Just reflecting on the poll, I wish there was an answer, which you usually get, which is all of the above. That would have been amazing, because I'm sure it's a shared responsibility, and it's one which all of those actions and more should happen before actually we can tackle the problem. So if you look at the scale of the plastic pollution problem, it is actually quite well known. It's nothing new. I think there are an estimated 150 million tons of plastic in the ocean, a number which grows by 11 million tons every year. An easy comparison to make in relation to understanding that figure, because in millions of tons, it's quite difficult to comprehend, is a truckload of plastic being dumped into the ocean every minute. So that's the scale of the problem that we are looking at. And where does it happen? It happens primarily because of mismanaged waste that is either not collected or adequately managed. And why is this happening? It's primarily because you're looking at a situation where economic growth, and population growth has actually outgrown waste management. So cities have been designed, population has grown, but waste management systems have not kept up to speed with that growth and consumerism which has happened. Even before that mismanaged plastic waste reached the ocean, it originates in cities, in communities which lack basic waste management and recycling infrastructure. So just to give you some statistics, 80% of the plastic waste is derived from land-based sources. It's not like people dumping plastic into the ocean. And 60% of that comes from urban centers. I believe by 2050, more than 50% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. And we need to make sure that these urban areas are well equipped to tackle the problem. There are solutions for tackling the problem. And it's not just about waste management and recycling infrastructure, but looking across the whole value chain. Now, let me throw the spotlight on our region. So for Southeast Asia, the volume of solid waste across the region has increased rapidly as population has grown, as consumerism has grown, as I mentioned earlier. Among various waste streams, in our part of the world, organics, including food waste, is a key component. So that's more than 50% of the solid waste that's generated in the region. Plastic, in most instances, is the second or third biggest contributor of the waste stream, typically making about 10 to 17% of the total plastic waste, which is generated. However, less than 50% of that plastic waste which is generated is collected. And even less than a quarter of that is actually recycled. So going back to the earlier statement I made about mismanaged plastic waste, that is something which needs to be really handled if we are to ever tackle the problem in our part of the world and globally. So the obvious question is there good news? Is the plastic pollution problem a solvable one? I mean, and I keep saying this, I mean, if we are not optimists, I don't think we should be working in this space at all, because this is a problem. The only challenge is that there is no silver bullet response. So it's a systems problem, and that requires a system solution. And when I say system solution, we need to ensure that different parts of the value chain work together, than have piecemeal solutions which tackle only one part of the problem. And it's like having closed loops, but smaller closed circles which do not interconnect and talk to each other. Now, based on research which is available through the work that has been done by Systemic and the Pew Charitable Trust, there are two advantages of adopting that systems approach to solving the challenge. Firstly, an 80% reduction of the ocean plastic leakage is possible by 2040. If we just use existing technologies, but we look at the problem and tackle the problem both upstream and downstream, with upstream and downstream solutions. And I'll explain the concept of upstream and downstream in my following slides. Secondly, from a public sector or a government cost perspective, the cost of managing the plastic waste in a system change scenario, as I described, between 2021 and 2040, is less expensive than managing a high leakage system under a business as usual scenario. So both from an economic benefit perspective and from an environmental perspective, it is better for us to adopt a systems approach to tackling this problem. Now let's look at innovation as one pathway or one way to solve this particular problem. Now, for better understanding of the innovations, I've mapped out a simplistic representation of the value chain on this slide and provided some examples. So just to explain the value chain chart here, upstream refers to material production and package design. Midstream is when the product's being delivered to consumers like ourselves, or is being used by the consumer. And downstream is typically after usage. So when plastic, which is a resource, is typically referenced to as waste. So what we are observing with respect to upstream innovations are twofold. Firstly, the use of alternative materials to replace single-use plastics or other applications. So these alternative materials might include fiber-based alternatives or compostable substitutes. There are a number of such materials which are coming up. So there's areca leaves, there's bagasse, which is actually the fiber left after sugarcane is crushed. There's cassava, which is being used especially in South and Southeast Asia to produce alternative to plastic. The seaweed, which is increasingly being discussed and developed as a material input for producing alternatives to plastic. So that's at the extreme end of the chain when you're looking at material production. You also have solutions such as redesign. When you redesign an existing product, so lightweighting or replacing the labels of PET bottles, from PVC to other materials, which has better recyclability, is another kind of innovation which is happening. On the midstream side of that value chain, actually, we look at innovations such as refill and reuse, of which we've seen plenty of examples in our part of the world. And then finally, on the downstream side, like I said, is after the plastic waste has entered the environment. So you are usually post-use, even before it enters the environment. So you have reverse vending machines, the example which you talked about earlier with respect to deposit return schemes in South Korea, and which is being planned for Singapore. You have solutions for sorting the mixed plastic waste streams which happen. And then the really last case scenario, which is once the material has really entered the environment, then you're talking about solutions in terms of cleaning up technologies. Now let's look at the impact of these innovations across that value chain, which I just shared. And for the ease of understanding, we've grouped these innovations into 8 buckets. So alternative materials, like I shared earlier, redesign, reuse and refill. There's a lot of innovations which are happening in relation to services, whether it be certification, footprinting, compliance services, and so on, digital mapping, operational platforms, recovery, and recycling. Now, if you look at the early part of that value chain, you will see alternative materials and redesign playing a part. Refill and reuse is a solution which cuts across both upstream and midstream because it impacts the plastic which is produced. It also impacts the delivery of the product and the consumer use of the product. You have operational platforms such as those which in a lot of more countries, we're seeing innovations around scheduling your waste pickup or incentivizing people to actually recycle their material through digital apps. So we see those innovations coming up. I shared the example of services such as certification and footprinting technologies. And then the last bunch of innovations that actually we see is in relation to recovery and recycling. Now, for us to truly make an impact in tackling the problem, we need more action in the midstream and upstream side of the value chain. And for these innovations to be successful, they must be supported, and they must be supported through policy measures, infrastructure, and changes in consumer behavior as well, before they can actually tackle the problem at scale or get the investments that they receive to grow. Just moving on to investments, the transition to a circular economy is not straightforward. So they'll require investment to the tunes of billions of dollars. And there's the most recent Google Circularity report, which referenced, I think, was $600 billion, which are needed for that transition specific to the plastic supply chain. And solving this financial gap is one of the biggest challenges we currently face. So at each stage of the company's growth, different forms of capital are necessary for the type of expansion and scalability. So at an early stage, you need startup capital, philanthropic capital. And then as you grow through, you need different types of capital as you go through that and achieve scale. Now, again, what we've observed is that while there's some capital flows into startups through grants or prize money from various competitions, we're seeing a lack of financing in the missing middle, the gap in funding for mid-scale companies, so slightly bigger than a startup or something like an SME, where they need to attract or they need that money for their growth and expansion and acquisition. So that's the missing middle as we referenced to in terms of the space where we are seeing the dearth of investments. Now, how can policy as an instrument, or how can policy and financing play a role in advancing the circular economy? First of all, policymakers can already make use of the tools of their disposal to shape markets. So basic waste management infrastructure, I talked about leakage at the beginning of my presentation, but basic waste management infrastructure needs to be improved so that innovations can work. So for example, there's absolutely no point for us to push a composting solution if there is no infrastructure to segregate the materials and for composting. Refill and reuse, great example, and I think it's a great solution. But if you really don't have the logistics of cleaning, for example, if you don't have regulations in place which actually provide requirements in terms of hygiene considerations, or policies which will promote consumers or the business to take on refill and reuse as a solution, there's only so much that refill and reuse innovations can do in terms of tackling the problem. So that's from a policy perspective. From a financing perspective, like I said, catalytic capital needs to come through. We've seen some examples of blended financing instruments and structures which come together. So that's when I say blended financing, it's both public and private capital coming together. So that public capital sort of helps address the risk concerns of private investors, and at the same time, it brings in new pools of money for plastic circularity. And finally, direct government investment helps as well. whether it be bilateral, multilateral assistance funds, which can be funneled through funneled through to these innovations and entrepreneurs in both formal and the informal side of the economy. Let me sum up my presentation with 3 of the gaps which need to be addressed to bring us close to circularity. And I'm not saying we're going to solve this problem in the next 1 year, 2 year or so, but rather we're trying to close that gap. And what the Circulate Initiative as a nonprofit and our partners are doing to support closing these gaps. So in relation to the financing gap, there is a need to demonstrate that these circular business models or plastics for plastics are investable opportunities. I think that's a huge challenge. For this purpose, what we've done is we've developed a toolkit in collaboration with the World Economic Forum's Global Plastic Action Partnership to inform investors how they can help address the plastic waste crisis, how capital from a variety of sources, like I just described, can be utilized to ensure that waste is recovered and recycled. Circulate Capital is our mission-aligned investment partner with assets under management of over, I think, about 165 million. They're also making direct investments in plastic circularity solutions. To tackle the equity gap, we're supporting this through our work through the incubation network. So programs which focus on livelihoods and social protection of informal waste workers, who are the backbone of the waste management systems in South and Southeast Asia. Finally, from an insights perspective, which is where a lot of our work is focused on, we are developing tools and analysis to fill that data and insights gap to tackle that problem through providing better knowledge. So we recently launched what is an open source prototype calculator called Places. So it helps track GHG emissions, reductions, energy, and water savings of waste management and recycling solutions that prevent plastic pollution in India and Indonesia. So this tool is available free of cost for anybody who wishes to use it to get a better sense of the connection between climate and plastics. And we are continuously working on that tool to develop, and we're currently working with the A-Star research team in Singapore to expand that tool's coverage to more markets in South and Southeast Asia. So wrapping up my presentation, we believe that cooperation between governments, investors, innovators, and corporates and other formal and informal actors is required to advance the sector. I think the problem is too big for one individual party to solve it. It requires an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we need to look at solutions across the whole ecosystem to ensure that we do not drown in an ocean of plastic waste. That's for me for now. Happy to take any questions which come up. And with that, let me hand the floor back to you, Aiman.
Thank you so much, Umesh. And I shall help to reiterate that message for the 3 gaps that need to be narrowed and closed. Again, financing, equity, and insights gap. And thank you for striking that optimistic tone also, that the problem is actually a solvable one if we take a systems approach, and that important reminder that we would all not be in this space if we are not optimistic about that. I'll come back to you in a while, and I think this has helped us understand the landscape much better. And now with the next speaker, we shall zoom in on something quite specific, packaging innovation. Eco-business readers probably first got acquainted with the Singapore-based company Tria when we wrote a story about fast food chain KFC and whether it has finally found the secret sauce to circular packaging. In a pilot scheme, the chain had worked with Tria to see if it can adopt a system of recycling that does not require it to change their operations too much and that does not rely on consumers to change much of their behavior. I will leave Pei Kang, CEO of Tria, to share more about their solutions. But before he starts his presentation, I think the team from Tria has a video it wants to show on how it's looking at helping to close the loop for events. And this one is particularly on the Formula One race in Singapore. I've had a sneak peek at it, and I do have so many burning questions for Pei Kang, but let's look at the clip first.
These foodware will be collected after use and converted into fertilizer in just one day.
We basically made it in our plant-based material. So essentially it is digestible, it can be broken down. So we further put it through our digestion technology. We can accelerate the pace rapidly to the extent it can be turned into fertilizer.
These will be enhanced by a world-renowned fertilizer producer and are then ready to be used in farming.
The more you improve the soil, the more you can secure productivity and yields. But at the same time, in the case of Tria, we have the opportunity to recycle nutrients.
Thanks everyone for having me. Hope you're having a good lunch. Thanks for tuning in. So my name is Pei Kang. I'm the CEO of Tria. And again, thanks EcoBusiness for featuring our video before this. This is something that we thought is a direction that could be quite interesting for us going forward. But let me just give everyone an overview of what we're doing, and also to populate the picture of what we're doing with KFC here as well. So it's like in June, we started a pilot, still ongoing with KFC, whereby we are closing the loop for their single-use packaging. So in this case, there's a couple of things that we managed to resolve. Okay, I think the very big one here, of course, is the need to source segregate. Because usually with food service, the waste is really messy because it has food scraps, it is oily, it is wet. So this in order to recycle such packaging waste is almost quite tedious. Right? You have to pick up every single piece and you have to wash them down. You have to put them in the right material bin as it is. So it is quite challenging. So what we did here is that we simply avoided that, knowing that that is a big roadblock, for us to really recycle food service packaging. So what we have here is basically we use plant-based packaging, and together with the food scraps, that is being thrown into the bin, we will digest them. And with our proprietary digestion technology, for which the product of it coming out of it is actually two parts. One is biogas for our anaerobic digestion system. The other one is compost fertilizer, for our aerobic system. So this further, is valorized into farm-ready fertilizer, whereby it can be put back into food crops, back to the table. So pretty much we're talking about two parts here. One is how we basically have organic recycling, enable organic recycling for single-use packaging, and the second part is regenerative agriculture. So I think just to set the stage a little bit, in terms of just putting everyone on the same page where we are today, I may not talk too much about this because I think most of you would have been quite familiar with it. So single-use plastics, one of the biggest contributor to here is single-use packaging. Pretty much a lot of it coming from the F&B sector. And a lot of the fast food service brands have already pledged forward, what is their commitment for 2025, 2030. So this is something that, there's a certain level of commitment that they push forward, which is encouraging. And one thing just to also, share in a very broad stroke, where the industry have explored and have gone into. I think reduce, reuse, recycle, these are three terms that we're very familiar with. We have gone through the phase whereby we reduced straws, we took away straws from our drinks. But that actually doesn't really move the needle much because straw itself is so lightweight as compared to all the other packaging, combined. So for reuse is quite tricky, right? For the likes of the fast food restaurant, considering that most of it is built around single use. And in order to go into the reuse mode, like they would require introduction of washing line, which is quite a big renovation and not that scalable across, think of McDonald's, for example, 20 over 1,000 outlets across the world. And most of this outlets are not owned by them. These are actually owned by the franchisees. Okay, so just applying a little bit more of the empathy here, you know, it's like for this franchisee, just think of it as for McDonald's to try to deploy this downwards to all the franchisees. Okay, they probably need the franchisees buy-in. If the franchisees don't buy in, you know, to go into the renovation, to go into dishwashing, you know what happens? Either they drop the business, or if not, hey, I might go to Subway next. I'm just saying. Okay, so this is scaling it up. All right, I think is a real teething issue from what we understand from working in the food service brands. Recycling, as I mentioned, I think recycling, this is there are technological constraints, and waste segregation is again a big problem. So I just want to give everyone a picture and know what we're doing with KFC. So KFC in North Point outlet, we are running this pilot with them. We basically replace all the SKU that they have used for dining in, such that everything all the packaging that's thrown into the bin is compatible to organic recycling. Okay, so the same bin, all right, that is being that they are currently using, we just decal on some instructions and it's good to go. We do not need a separate bin, and it's business as usual. And we'll collect the waste, we'll digest them, and they will become this fertilizer. So, but essentially, you know, what we're trying to do here is to really get the whole loop moving, and we take waste ownership. When we say we take waste ownership, what does this mean? So, you know, we're somewhat changing the business model a little bit, in a sense whereby with KFC, we're not just providing the packaging, all right? We are also, you know, contractually saying, hey guys, you know, can you consider letting us, all right, take the waste ownership legally? Okay, so that in itself will allow us to control what goes in, okay, and what comes out and what happens to it after, because we want the fertilizer. So that's another valorization, monetization, all right, point, which you know, is something that we look forward to. Okay, and I'm going to touch next on, so okay, so this is organic recycling largely, you know, how this as part of the whole build up when it comes to solid waste management, you know, it's really a push towards circular economy. And so let me explain a little bit how our technology work. So today, maybe in view of time, I will not go too much into this, but there are, with organic recycling, basically, we're leveraging on the current movement when it comes to food waste treatment. Okay, so with food waste treatment, what are the default pathway? There's the aerobic treatment, there's the anaerobic treatment. Aerobic treatment will be your industrial composting, anaerobic treatment will be your anaerobic digester. So as you can see on the right-hand side, so there are certain issues when you try to put in packaging waste in here. Of course, we heard of compostable packaging. Compostable packaging is actually not a welcome material in industrial composting. First thing, it does not add value to the compost, because what gives value to compost is your NP and K, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We may remember this from our secondary school science. Okay, so, and they take a tremendous amount of time, right, to compost as opposed to food waste. So what we do here, our first technology, we accelerate the speed of composting down to a day. Okay, for with anaerobic digestion, this is our second technology, right, whereby we basically depolymerize the packaging waste to such an extent that it can be digested. So I'm going to use the analogy of our stomach. Our stomach is an anaerobic digester. Okay, so you can handle food, all right, quite easily. It digests within 2 days. But if I were to ask you to take in biodegradable packaging, you know, you can digest them, but you probably will starve to death, because, you know, it would take half a year at least, all right, for it to be digested. So what we do here is that our technology basically enable, all right, packaging waste to be passed into anaerobic digestion, which is a technology that Singapore government itself through NEA is setting up for the Tuas Nexus plant for food waste. So, you know, it's like we can go to NEA and say, hey, you know, it's like maybe you guys consider a new feedstock that's coming from food service packaging. Okay, so we felt that that is a breakthrough. And why do we say that? Because what are the components in packaging that actually we can valorize from. Packaging is essentially your C, H, and your O, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Now the best way to valorize them is through biogas, whereby they can be turned into methane, CH4, and can be used to generate new electricity. So this is what we think is a eventual pathway. So next year, from Q3 onwards, you can look forward to having a 20-ton anaerobic digester, which we are in the process of design and building, okay, to be able to cater for the food service sector. So yeah, so this one I will very quickly touch on that. So this is the food waste hierarchy from NEA. Basically, the fact that we can address post-consumption food waste because of how messy it is and the accompanying packaging that comes along. Okay, I probably won't go too much into this, but I think just to say, I think one thing that's very important to get this whole thing to move, all right, it is not just looking at resolving single-use packaging, because that's a one-way street. You're just ticking off a box, and that is what is the value of that you can derive out from there. I think value creation is something that's very important in the systemic thinking that we need to adopt in terms of circularity. So the fact that we want the fertilizer, all right, that comes out from the digestion process, I think that speaks for its own, that we will ensure that the system is upkeep, okay, rather than relying on policing to make sure that the system is maintained. So I think this is maybe one point which I like to bring to the surface to say, I think how the question is, how long are we going to rely on a policing system to ensure that we are doing good by the environment, but rather just letting the creating value throughout all the stakeholders so that everyone will make their own effort to upkeep the system. Yeah. And carbon footprint wise, on the top, you're looking at the carbon footprint when it comes to existing plastics with packaging, going through to incineration, and this is the carbon footprint. And with our system, we are looking at significant reduction of carbon footprint. So, and that's it. We're looking for partners who would like to join us on our journey. And I'll be happy to, if you just reach out to us, just write to us if you have any questions. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Pei Kang, for sharing about the solutions, what it means to take waste ownership, but at the same time, take a deeper look at how it will actually affect business models and how we can keep it cost effective. I think stalemate is such a strong word that I saw on your presentation slides, and it gives us food for thought as well. And we already have questions coming in, and I mean, because of the interest of time, I also wanted to really jump into one of the questions that has already been put into the chat box, and it is for Pei Kang. And I also wanted to ask for the KFC pilot trial that Trial is working on. What is the progress? And I think there is a question from BB on which farm does the product of your waste processing, for example, fertilizer, go to? And maybe you can give us a quick summary of that.
Sure. So the trial is still ongoing, guys. But initial results are so far smooth. Okay. There are, I would say, I think we need to encourage some visibility or focus more into the so-called value creation on the fertilizer part, because I think right now the attention is very much still on how they can resolve the single-use packaging, because of course obviously this is something that is highly visible. Okay, in terms of the where does the compost go? So right now we don't actually have a lot of waste, to be honest. We're just getting a few kg of waste. Sorry, a few kg of compost every day. So we're just accumulating them, passing them to the what do you call that? Community farmers. So that's it. And I think also one thing to take note, there is a certain size of an engine to start, all right, in order for us to get the fertilizer system moving. Okay, because for the farmers that we can provide to, I think consistency is key. how can we create a consistency in the not just a nutrient value, but in the amount that we can provide them. Yeah, so this is also something that is the next stage that we're working to see how we can scale that on.
Sure. Thank you very much for sharing and your update. Umesh, I think we're starting to see institutional investors sit up and take notice of the potential for both like returns and impact from the circular economy. In the context of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, do you see that mobilization of capital happening? And I think you mentioned some of the gaps that we still have, but how can finance flow towards innovative and effective solutions for it to really make a dent? What is that next step that we're looking at?
Yeah, I'll give you the sobering answer first, and hopefully I can build up some enthusiasm as well. So the reality is that investment has not been comparable with the scale of the plastic pollution crisis in our region. I mean, it's the case for most parts of the world anyway, but it's especially the case for our part. Just to quote, and I referenced the Google Circularity report earlier. So just to give you some numbers from that, and I referenced the 600 billion figure, which is actually what needs to be mobilized, not just for the region, but globally for the next 20 years to ensure that circular supply chains can meet the global demand for plastics. That's the quantum that we are looking at on a global basis. So there's really a case for institutional capital to set up, support that fight against plastic pollution. And it is encouraging to see that there are more investors actually looking at this space and eventually, but the reality is that if you're an institutional investor, you're actually looking at the return on the investment that you make. And so long as a business can credibly make that case, they will find the capital flows. We are also supporting through our incubation network early stage startups and ventures who are working in the space to tackle plastic pollution. We're also looking at providing more insights into the investability of the space. I referenced the work we did with the World Economic Forum and Global Plastic Action Partnership, where we're trying to explain the case for investments and private capital to flow. However, we need to make sure that there is that more information which is available to the investors. There is a business case which is actually being made by these innovation and the innovators and the entrepreneurs so that eventually they find the capital that they need. There is a need, like I said at the beginning of my presentation, for catalytic capital, philanthropic capital, because waste is eventually seen and it's always will be seen as a public service. Now, unless there is that subsidy which is provided to make sure that service is actually taken care of, for any investor, this will not be seen as a lucrative space until and unless they feel that, okay, the policies are in place, the systems work well, and now the innovations which are coming through have that enabling environment which facilitates that investment. So those are sort of the basic conditions which need to be in place before really we see more capital which comes through for innovations into plastic circularity.
Sure. Thank you for your comprehensive answer. And I know, Pei Kang, you mentioned about this thing about policing, and I'm kind of like against that. And but I think one key thing would be people are also looking at driving behavioral change on a large scale. And when it comes to charging deposit, for example, for single-use plastic, I think we have been seeing setbacks in some countries. The question for Pei Kang maybe is that, do you think it's because that we're kind of like too focused on policing and having legislation around that? And I think for both speakers as well, I think what are your thoughts on that? For example, we're seeing South Korea taking a scale back from a cup return scheme, and Singapore has now announced delays for details for a beverage container return scheme, but it was after a delay. So maybe just your thoughts on that. Maybe Pei Kang, if you could go ahead first.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a good question. And maybe just to share a little bit my background. My background is in, sorry, just to say my mind is a little bit slow today. I'm actually down with COVID, so please, I apologize if there's any latency here. So my background is in industrial design. So I think, and because being exposed, to the creative side of us, I kind of became more of a value creation person. Okay, and I think that drives behavior. And also, and especially so when we're dealing with such a complicated system solution, I think it's very important that you have to look at the whole system, identify which are the stakeholders in there, and ask yourself, are we creating a win for everyone? Okay, rather than just following the ways and ask, what are we doing the way? So I guess it's a more empathetic approach here. And one experience that helps me here is consumer electronics. I used to come from consumer electronics, and I think back in the heydays, I consider that the heydays, right? Where Apple, is up and coming, and I think the most inspiring innovation, in my opinion, is Apple iTunes, because it solved it's not a system problem, but it created a system win. Okay, because consumers can buy songs at 99 cents, not $20 for 20 songs, with attached to a lot of other songs you do not want to buy. Okay, and 99 cents is below the psychological threshold. Okay, so first win for consumer, right? Second win, Apple managed to sell more devices. Okay, and third win, single-handedly pushed up the entire music industry sales. I think that level of system innovation where you get a win all throughout, it is somewhat lacking in our efforts to move towards a circularity. So I think I'm not saying that it's like we have managed to prove ourselves convincingly that we have managed to achieve this. We are still in the process, of course. With the pilot with KFC, and recently we're starting out with another with sets. But I feel that probably could be a more value-adding mindset. And I again want to emphasize on value adding. I think if I use another analogy, if you think of graphs, X and Y axis, I think we are just trying to see how we can navigate on the X and Y axis. I think when you get into the creation zone, you create a Z axis. There's unlimited possibility here. And I think that could be the spirit, to really see how we can create a win for everyone. And I think in this case, waste has always been seen as, it's a one-way street. All right, there's no value in it. Now, perhaps can we create more value out of waste? And in my opinion, waste valorization is a very exciting industry. Okay, the moment we can, find that value in waste, that sector is going to self-propagate, okay, without prompt by government, without policing, okay, and that whole recycling culture, right, renewability culture may just kickstart from there. So I think this is one part we're trying to unlock. All right, of course, which is why we invested into our digestion technologies, and yeah, so hopefully, let's see how that goes. Sorry, it's very extended answer to your question.
Yeah, no worries. Umesh, what do you think about that?
I mean, let me look at that question in two parts. Firstly, about the deposit return systems and its impact on plastic circularity or tackling the plastic waste problem, and then I'll talk a little bit about behavior change. So firstly, in terms of deposit return systems, I think it's been well established globally that deposit return systems usually work in terms of improving the collection of materials. I think that's a given. So that's a good start. However, the issue we face with our markets is that the high value materials usually get picked up. So your PETs, your HDPEs will typically get picked up, especially in countries where the informal work economy exists. Informal waste workers will pick it up more often than not. So it will improve. So it's a great start. The challenge we face in our emerging markets is not necessarily just with these PETs and HDPEs, not the rigid packaging. It is with those flexible packaging. It is with those multi-laminate or multi-layered packaging, which just doesn't get picked up. And for that, DRS doesn't work. So it's a question of how do we make sure that we have a policy which obviously is great and it will improve the sort of pickup rates for PET, HDPEs, and so on, the high value materials. Even for that, we need to make sure that there's a system in place. It's great and it will work in countries like Singapore and South Korea, where the culture as well probably is a bit more attuned to DRS. Obviously, the cost component is why South Korea had so much issues implementing something like that. But in an emerging market, that's really going to be challenging and doesn't really tackle the big plastic waste problem, which is actually a flexible packaging. Now, from a behavioral perspective or behavioral change perspective, we've seen through our research that there's a return on investment on behavioral change solutions. So it's about 2 to 4 years that, based on our work with environmental nonprofit Deltera, that we realized that that's all that it takes. Once you invest in behavior change towards recycling, that's all that it takes. And it also is less expensive, 80% less expensive than technology-based alternatives. So it obviously seems like a logical step to take an investment in behavioral change steps. I see DRS as just one pathway towards making those behavioral changes. DRS is great, but there's so many other parts of that value chain, so many other solutions that we need to look at alongside DRS as one.
It's great that both of you came from, answered the question coming from different angles, and gives us a very good understanding of what are some of the obstacles and challenges right now. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat box, and I'm spoiled for choice. I think one question from Robin in the chat box would be, tackling the waste problem has been complicated by false or overly hyped solutions. What do both of you think needs to be done to raise the bar in certification to ensure solutions are genuine, impactful, and lasting?
I can go first. I said I'll go first because this is quite close to what we are doing at the moment. So we are actually working on a study where we are looking at innovations which are happening in this part of the world in relation to tackling the plastic waste challenge. So we've gone through a lot of innovations, sort of filtered them to proof of concept approach that we've adopted, and there's very few which we feel are scalable. So I think there will be a natural fallout of these overhyped but less impactful solutions, as Robin puts it. And if you go back and look at it, there's always that graveyard of solutions which came up 3 to 5 years ago, which didn't do its work, was overhyped as being the next best thing after baked bread, just didn't work, and it eventually didn't get the capital as well. So I feel these solutions which come through need to make their own business case in terms of investments. Otherwise, there's always going to be that case where if the solution is okay, they can go from one innovation challenge to another, they'll get some of that capital, but in terms of actually seeing the amount which takes them from being a local or even a municipality-based solution to something which really cuts across countries and geographies, it just wouldn't happen, because when it comes to investors, they'll do their due diligence, and most people would see through these solutions that they are really just hype and no substance. So I think there will be that natural fallout which happens simply because they don't work.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, that is a very realistic way of looking at it. And I guess, Pei Kang, for you, maybe let me re-angle the question a little bit. I think we're talking about hype here, and you showed the video about Formula One collaboration. And I think we are ultimately looking at a type of sport that has a kind of like a high carbon cost, and packaging for the event might not be like the most material to cutting its footprint. How does TRIA actually like assess or choose which partners it works with, and determining if corporates are really committed to the cause of cutting waste, or maybe just like pulling a PR stunt? How do you react to that?
I guess your question is, how do we choose the client to see whether they are serious about this? I guess we avoided that part by simply just saying that we'll collect the waste. So and maybe if I can just on Robin's question, right? I think he asked, how can we ensure that solutions are genuine, impactful, and lasting? Let me break it down. I think genuine is in policing. Okay, so what is a policing effort? And I'm not an expert in that. Impactful is a derivative result. Lasting, maybe again, how to make solutions last. If solutions are self-proliferating, it will last naturally. And I'm a value creation guy. And I think maybe to further give it a bit more of a solution, it's like if there is value in waste, is there value in the recyclables to the extent that it is self-proliferating? And I believe, the waste collector will come back and say, hey, this is not our deal, and you're not giving me the right feedstock. Feedstock, not waste. You're not giving me the right feedstock. I'm not taking it. So I think, it's like maybe if you can, I feel there's more value looking at value creation rather than, again, policing. So that's my opinion of it.
Thank you. And we have in the chat box some questions for Pei Kang specifically and Shreya from our managing editor, Jessica. She said that thank you for the insightful presentations. And for Tria, where do you get the material for your bio-based packaging, and how much does that cost in comparison to conventional packaging? How does the life cycle analysis of your entire process compare with existing processes for F&B companies? And I think we have another question on life cycle assessment as well from Katerina, asking if there has been life cycle assessment analysis on the overall impact of your product or solution, including, I think, logistics or transportation. I guess, do you see this solution scalable internationally, or would only make sense locally or regionally within geographic boundaries?
One question at a time.
Yeah, one by one.
Okay. I think to Jessica's question, right? I think where does the packaging material come from? So basically, this dextrose base is extracted from plants, and I think there's a few plants here that's you can extract that from. So for us, it's industrial corn as well as bagasse. Okay, so it's largely speaking, this is plant-based, bio-based, it's like we are not using fossil fuel, and I think that avoids a big part of that carbon footprint. Life cycle analysis of an entire in my last, I think one of my last few slides, I do have that. But just bearing in mind that those are with certain assumptions shown in. And I was like, this are, for example, comparing with 100% plastics compared to our packaging, as opposed to if you look at the likes of KFC, sometimes it's a hybrid material, it's paper, mixed with functional coating, which is plastics. So yeah, I will be happy to, I think Wyman, you'll be sharing the slides later on, right? Will you be?
Sorry. Yeah,
yeah.
We could try to do that. Maybe we will work that after.
Yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Sure.
And there's another question on life cycle analysis.
Yeah, I think it's about whether the solution
transportation
is
logistics.
Yeah.
Okay, so good question. I think very thorough. I think one thing about life cycle analysis, you have to be plotting from factory gate all the way to usage, to end of life. So in that particular analysis, we did not add in logistics because we see that as a constant. So that is a bit of a ballpark, but we'll be more than happy to share with you our assumptions within that as well.
Yeah, I think our administrator has confirmed that we can share the link to the slides after in our email that will go out later on. I think there's a question for Umesh by Celia Sura. In Indonesia specifically, we have a big problem with single-use diapers. 50% plastic waste found in river is single-use diapers. I think it's a very specific product that she's asking about. Every market actors, they only focus with valuable plastics. Do you have any idea how to recycle, or are there any solutions for this specific type of plastic?
Yeah. Being a parent myself, I think this is a challenge I faced years ago. I mean, there's absolutely precious little you can do with diapers. So I understand in Indonesia there's a PT Softex and the work they're actually doing with one of the multinational, which is specifically looking at diapers and I can't remember the exact name of the company, but I can come back on that. But there's one solution there, which is working specifically in Indonesia. I'm also aware of work which is happening in Australia through one player. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. And then there's obviously work which is happening around not using plastic at all, plastic-based diapers, but other using cloth-based diapers. So these are the three which immediately come to my mind with specific reference to pollution relating to diapers.
Thank you, Umesh. And I think we're into the last probably 5 to 6 minutes of our session, but I'm going to go through maybe 1 or 2 more questions in the chat since there are so many. I think from Jin Kiat for both of you. He said that there are many new startups in this space. Apart from funding, what can be done to support and grow these startups and help this, essentially help these startups grow and expand?
Can I? So is that targeted? Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we're still in the startup phase. I think what we value is, it's like when we speak to whether or not it's small companies or corporates, right? I think to the individuals, each person would like to be able to contribute. They do see sustainability as a big problem, but the obstacle obviously is when they need to escalate this upwards, 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer to the corporate board. I think this is where the whole logical, how do I say, process, just make things quite difficult to move. I feel there can be a platform, perhaps eco-business, can facilitate such a platform in terms of trying to tackle what issues, be specific though, don't be too broad, to the extent I say, hey, and pull players in, all right, to see how we are able to, perhaps it can be it's not so much going straight into solutioning mode, okay, but let's idea a little bit, systemically, look at a system which who sits on put the logos into each system and say, hey, how can we come together and solve and close the circle for this and that, and that will be valuable. Because for us, we took along the whole ecosystem, it's not just with KFC. I think with our local waste recycling partner Shania, with Yava Fertilizer Company, it is just a lot of time, just rallying everyone along to get the whole partnership going. And I think, but the latent need in everyone is there. Yeah, so as a platform to pull everyone together let's rally on together.
Sure. Umesh, do you have a response to that? I think you mentioned those medium-sized startups that really need the financing. Maybe you could elaborate more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we are also realizing is that when it comes to their specific solution set, a lot of these startups are really good at that, but they are so focused on that solution and development of that solution that everything which needs to happen around that is where they're challenged. So, for example, when you're talking about a small recycler in Indonesia, for example, they're really good at what they need to do with respect to flaking and pelletizing and so on and so forth. But there's the whole package around professionalizing a business which needs to be thought through. So the capacity building, the trainings, all of that, which initially can be seen is peripheral, but becomes really critical for the growth and sustenance of an organization. So obviously capital is critical for growth, but then there's the whole package which needs to be available, especially with micro, small and medium enterprises before we can say that, okay, there's a possibility for them to continue to scale and grow. I'll also give you I know we are over time, but a perspective also in terms of thinking, because this was something which came up during a discussion we had last week, where in some instances, the way the solutions come up, especially waste management related solutions, they come up because a person is really interested in tackling the problem. And oftentimes they're really focused on solving that problem in that particular location. So they feel that the moment they have taken care of that particular geography or municipality or locality, that's it. They don't necessarily think of expanding that solution beyond that particular geography. Maybe once we see more successful solutions, there's an opportunity to sort of engage these local partners to think beyond their periphery, because like I said, it's a problem which is not local. It's a transboundary problem, but it's a problem which needs local solutions. And a lot of times, if there is an opportunity for these solutions to be contextualized and applied in specific geographies, that's something we should really think of and get these entrepreneurs to actually share these ideas and see if they're also investable.
Sure. I'll zoom out and broaden the perspective with just one last question. And that is, I mentioned the global treaty, a legally binding one on plastic pollution in my introduction. And there is also a question in the chat box. How do you think this treaty will have actually efforts to curb the problem in Asia? What is the Asia perspective on this? And maybe either Pei Kang or Umesh can go first. Umesh, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So it's a start. I mean, and I'm really positive that something like this is actually happening because it necessarily brings the spotlight into a problem which not many people see as a problem. So that's a great start. Now, with specific reference to Asia, obviously, given I referenced population earlier, and that population relates to consumption. That consumption invariably relates to plastic usage. So there's an opportunity for Asia to show that there is an opportunity for circular economy to work in our part of the world. Now, with that basis, if you start looking at specific countries and their activities, so there's the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee discussion, which happens in Uruguay, I think, next month. And countries were asked to make submissions for that. And there's already been such submissions for what needs to be discussed at this first intergovernmental negotiation. Indonesia has made one, Singapore has made one, I think Japan has made one as well. So it's at a very early stage, and I think Asia has a seat at the table, right? There are pertinent questions coming up. I think Pekang, we had first quizzed extensively on LCA analysis, and that was one of the questions which Indonesia raised. What is the LCA analysis which needs to be done in relation to plastic? What is a pollutant here? What is a plastic which is considered a pollutant here? Singapore, obviously, because of the way where we stand in relation to the transboundary nature of the problem, is also asking questions around, or wants to discuss questions around the transboundary nature of the problem, about marine debris, about marine plastics, and so on. So I think we have to go with optimism that there is a discussion which is happening. And like I said, it is really great that this discussion at least brings the topic into the top of minds for everyone. Eventually, the proof of the pudding would be in terms of what happens after that. So we're supposed to have a legally binding instrument by 2024. How does that translate into national action plans? How does a national action plan translate into local implementation, and so on and so forth? But definitely a great start and a move in the right direction.
Thank you. Pekang, do you have anything else to add on before we close the session?
Sure. Okay, I'm not very familiar with the regulatory aspect of things, but maybe I can share my comments on on this news and also hearing from Umesh. I think first thing I'm going to add a contextual layer, to Asia and why is focused on plastics problem in Asia. I think out of the top 10 contributors of ocean plastic waste, Asia is a very big contributor. Or I think 8 out of 10 is in Asia. So ocean plastics, maybe that's why it's targeted at Asia. That's my assumption here. So, but I think also one thing it kind of pull out is the lack of a proper waste management system even. I think it is known that Indonesia has waste industry. A big part of it is supported by informal waste collectors. The Karanguni likes in Singapore, and I think that's just why a lot of waste just end up in the ocean. The way I choose to look at this is a fantastic opportunity for the waste industry here to be catalyzed and grown. Okay, so if you can find a way, all right, to create that sector of the business, wow, this is untapped space. This is the way. You can leapfrog that industry 3 steps forward. So, for example, now, if anyone have good links to Indonesia, right, and if we can get KFC to say, hey, we love the closed loop solution that you have, we like to implement this in Indonesia. Okay, so we take waste ownership. Okay, and I have a contract to give. So which informal waste collector village would like to take this up? Okay, we come to you, we bring you business. Hey, set up an AD plant, adopt our technology, and this is a 5-year contract. You amortize your equipment in 3 years. The rest is yours. You keep the biogas, generate electricity, go for it. So I like to encourage a view, not so much of compliance, because I'm not saying that compliance is no good. Please do not misunderstand. I think all efforts in all directions is actually very good. We're at this point whereby we are on a pivotal change, all right, to really take care of our environment. But I feel there is a lack, all right, to think in terms of value creation. So again, back to my point earlier.
Thank you for helping me end this session on a very optimistic note. And I'm afraid, dear speakers and participants, that's all the time we have at this Lunch and Learn session. But I do thank the Circulate Initiative and TRIA for partnering with us for today's event. I'd like to take some time to share with you our next flagship event that will be taking place on 4 November. The link for the events can be found in the chat box This year's Cities Possibilities Forum will be a hybrid session held in the week before COP27, the global climate change meeting hosted by Egypt this year. This edition will focus on how cities can implement better, faster, and more effective climate initiatives. The 2023 edition of the Livability Challenge, Asia's largest sustainability solutions platform, presented by Temasek Foundation, will also be launched at this event for the first time. Join us as we unveil the new themes for the sustainability innovations we are looking for in the year ahead. And I think Pei Kang came up with a very good problem statement that we should all be looking at probably for the year to come. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good Friday and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.